Zhaniya Aubakirova presents a series of discussions about the place of Kazakh culture in the global world. Meetings with prominent public figures, candid conversations, collisions of opinions, and discussions about the most important things.
Hello, dear friends. Today our guest is Beknur Kissikov. Beknur Kissikov is a very interesting person. He's practically one of the first representatives of the literary milieu to participate in our program. He's a wonderful writer. He's a book volunteer. He did a lot to organize various festivals and competitions in the country, and he actively supports young writers of Kazakhstan. I think it will be very interesting to talk with him today. Hello, Beknur.
Hey there, Zhaniya.
Although we are representatives of different fields of art, I'm absolutely sure that there are some common characteristics intrinsic to both music and literature. But let's start with this. No doubt, we all admire Mukhtar Awezov, Abdijamil Nurpeisov, poets Maghjan Jumabayev and Mukagali Makatayev. But time passes, and now, of course, people want to know more about contemporary literature. As a young writer, can you please tell us what literary processes are taking place right now? Of course, when it comes to culture, everything is very, very ambiguous. And I believe there is this certain bias when we say such things. And of course, the world has changed so much, the times have changed. It is said that no one reads long texts anymore, let alone books or novels. Tweet rules the world, doesn't it? What do you think about it?
I agree with you. Yes, unfortunately, this phenomenon exists, and so does the clip-thinking phenomenon. Audio and video resources have gained immense popularity, and the book, of course, dominated the period when people had no other channels to receive information from. But this does not mean that books' days are over. It will always exist, always. And let's be honest, even if we think of the 19th and 20th century, readers never were the absolute majority of the population. There's always been only a certain percentage of readers.
Oh, really?
Yes, something around 10 to 20%. It was pretty much the same in pre-revolutionary Russia and in the 20th century. Yes, maybe now this percentage has decreased. But when I analyze book markets of the USA and Europe, I see that people are reading. Just yesterday, I got acquainted with the study where the scholars named the most reading countries. And these are Russia, China, India, Japan, Iceland. So you see, literature is in demand, same as it has always been. Although these days e-books are more popular, still books are present in our everyday life. We definitely cannot say that young people do not read these days. They do. Moreover, many scholars have already proven that reading a book and receiving ready-made information are two different things. For example, media content, television, video, radio. These all are considered ready-made information, kind of junk food, you know? And when a person reads a book, for instance, this is a completely different way of comprehension. The information he gets from the book is filtered through the prism of his consciousness. He processes it, and as a result, he develops emotional intelligence and even empathy. And I believe that a person becomes smarter because of reading, as it is an intellectual process requiring imagination and hard work. It is a demanding process, and this is hermeneutics at its best. This is a deep process. Academicians and scientists have already developed their theories on how to make a person smarter with books, not just through obtaining information, but through the reading per se.
It's easy to criticize this process from the outside, so to speak. But when you are inside, there are many details that ordinary people are not necessarily aware of. But if we want to achieve this, it's very important that each of us engages more in educational work, popularizing those things. And this is where you come in. You are the host of the book club program. You are a co-organizer of the Kitab Fest festival. And this is only natural. I'm a big believer that life itself directs us, pushes us into activities we were always meant to be doing. And it seems to me that the very essence of creativity and art is not solely about creation, but also about being able to engage the audience, the readers, you know? And this is even more relevant today, when there's so much information, when there are so many distractions. So, tell us about your activities and initiatives. How do they influence our society?
This is a very difficult question.
How so?
Because it is a layered question. In order to answer that, we first need to think about how a person gets involved in volunteering or social activism. I believe that at the very core, every person has this need to do that. Why should books be read and why should books be promoted? Because if we don't do this, no one else will. This is the first thing. Secondly, if we are talking about the book festival you just mentioned, Kitab Fest, I came up with this idea in a second, you know? It was very sudden. Once I saw some books scattered on the floor at the entrance of my house. These were 2 volumes of Abay Jolie by Mukhtar Awezov. And imagine, this great book was just dumped there. I was shocked. If someone does not need a book, he should bring it to the Kitab Fest and participate in book crossing, an exchange of books. This festival became a pioneer, and later this initiative has been taken up by the whole city. The first year we held the Kitab Fest, it was in 2010. We handed out 10,000 books. Can you imagine? 10,000! People collected books. They were really excited. All it took was just to awaken this desire to read in them again.
To create ideal conditions for this, right?
Yes, to create those conditions. Unfortunately, we lost the book reading system in the 90s. It needs to be restored and people will read again, I'm sure. For example, when I was in the New York subway, I noticed that every third person was reading a book enthusiastically. So normally books are a kind of cultural element. They should be natural in everyday life. But we have just spoken about the book volunteering. You are one of those volunteers too.
Yes, I'm involved with the Okirman Aul project.
Each of us has our own contribution to this business, and it is a great thing.
It's only natural that in my program, I would like to speak about music in one way or another. So let's talk about it a bit. What do you personally care about in the tremendous world of music?
Well, I guess I am very much into jazz, but I am into its softer version, so to speak. And talking about our local bands, I've always loved A Studio of 1989, the year when they composed Julia and White River, and in the 1990s.
Confusing, huh?
Yes, it became confusing at some point. By the way, they would add some synth pop and jazz notes to their compositions in the 80s. It was really cool. And then it somehow became just pop music, but I don't like pop. In general, I really respect and admire those people who love and understand the classics. Now there are many types of intelligence, and if we talk about musical intelligence, then it is definitely formed under the influence of classical, academic music.
Yes, of course.
Well, Mozart is a bit complicated to me.
And Bach?
I can listen to Bach a little, only to some of his works. I think it can be difficult because I don't have a musical education.
Education?
And a perfect pitch. Well, not necessarily perfect, but you know, have a good ear for music, have a taste for it.
And study this for sure.
Absolutely.
One should study this. So, what does one get from a music education?
As Inayat Khan once said, every person is music in the body. Once the soul was asked to enter a body and the soul refused. It said that it could not enter such an imperfect body, and music was sent down from above, and only through music.
The soul could enter the body.
Exactly, because the soul itself is music. Moreover, us writers, we always strive to fill our every writing
With some kind of a sound.
Exactly. We always search for this melody, because music, although I don't want to admit it, is more primary than the literature.
The voice was first, then there was singing, and then there was a word.
Exactly. The voice was first.
It is a fact, even if you don't feel like admitting it.
Yes, I don't want to admit it, but alas, it is a fact. Therefore, if we look at, for example, Nietzsche's magnificent masterpiece, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, we will discover that it is pure music and words, no matter how paradoxical it may sound. Look at his style, it's kind of 19th century intellectual rap. Or if we read Faust, for example, in each of these works there is music, a melody. Therefore, every writer, when writing a book, must necessarily feel the rhythm, melody, tempo. Without this, there will be no perfection in his work.
So can you please tell me this, Beknur? Here I am looking at you and involuntarily comparing you to myself. You see, as musicians, we have been dealing with the classics of the last 3 or 4 centuries. All this has already crystallized in us. And if you look at any modern performer, especially pianists, they will always have a luxurious repertoire.
Yes.
So, whenever I think about our composers, I would always think about you, about the writers. And it is so much more difficult for you people. After all, it seems that everything has already been written. Do you personally feel this sense of comparison with the classics of literature? Let's talk about this. What happens inside a creative person's mind when he decides to write a novel? Moreover, I understand that as a contemporary writer, you are trying to find new forms of literature. You even have certain names for those forms, right? Polylogue.
Polylogue, biblio-novel.
Biblio-novel, and eco-fantasy. Can you elaborate on this a bit, please?
Well, you know, if one thinks of those 7 notes, he might think, is there anything else that is left to compose? But at the same time, there are so many variations. It's like in chess, where there are a million moves and maybe even a billion we don't know yet. And it is the same with literature. But he can write a lot and in a variety of ways. I'm not saying that I have written novels that are genius, but I tried to pour my heart and soul into them. For example, All. It is a polylogue. It is a kind of tribute to the stream of consciousness, a poly-style novel written in different verses. The main character constantly refers to his subconscious, and at the same time he communicates with other people, and as a result, the dialogue turns into a polylogue, into a conversation of a number of people.
Oh, so that's what a polylogue is.
Yes, it is about a split of consciousness, and at the same time I tried to write each chapter in different genres, so you see, writers now have a lot of opportunities in this regard. And if we are talking about my eco-fantasy novel, I See You, here's the case. The 20th century changed genres a little, and it is very difficult for writers to fit into some classical norms of literature. In the contemporary literary world, there are no norms, and genres are being eroded. Therefore, we can, for example, imagine that the main character, while walking along the shores of the Aral Sea, suddenly finds himself in the 9th century in some ancient state located on the Aral shores. And of course, there is love, romance, intrigues, local officials are scheming.
I'm now looking forward to your next novel. It is getting ready for publication, right?
Yes.
Tell me more about this, please.
Hal Jailao.
What a beautiful title.
Well, to be honest, it is a borrowed name.
You combine...
Yes, Kok Jailao, Hal Jailao, you know. I was greatly impressed by the way our activists fought for Kok Jailao. and it inspired me to write a fantasy on this topic. Tal Jailao is a kind of sacred place somewhere on the banks of the Sir Darya, where all the books are preserved and where all the former bookkeepers live.
Incredible.
So, not a single book was lost. They all are kept safe there. After all, we know many examples when the world's greatest libraries were destroyed. You know both the Alexandrian Library and the Atrau Library, for instance. But there, in that sacred place, all the books are preserved. Those ancient bookkeepers teamed up with the local modern library curators.
Unbelievable.
And they helped them to protect the library in Almaty, which greedy constructors are trying to demolish.
Look, but this is...
And of course, there is romance in the book.
How interesting. Now, tell me please, I came up with this question. You know, sometimes we can play music, and you use certain and specific words, and naturally, you cannot but react to reality if you have critical thinking, if something touches you deeply. So, thinking about this, what can you tell us about censorship in the literary process?
In fact, before, in my youth, I was very...
sensitive about it?
I was very sensitive about it, about this word, about the very philosophy of censorship. It seemed to me that censorship is the most evil thing that can ever interfere with creativity. But on the other hand, if we delve into this topic, then I would say that there should be some kind of artistic censorship, at least in some aspects. I'm not talking about strict censorship, but rather about some advisory art editing. After all, one needs to understand that the words can hurt. Words can have a very powerful influence over people. In general, any creative object has this influence. Therefore, this should entail some kind of responsibility, which an author is obliged to bear. And in this regard, I look at it in a positive way. Of course, it is not worth mutilating the original idea, but there is no harm in controlling the process, making sure that what is written does not harm readers. So I'm certainly not a big supporter of censorship, but I understand that sometimes a little censorship is needed.
And what about Kazakhstani writing class? How are they?
They are not very well. But I must say right away, no one ever promised us that writing would be easy. And it is true to all professions, I guess.
Creative professions.
Yes, creative ones. You know, if a person thinks that he will start writing and will immediately earn good money and gain fame, it is necessary to moderate these ambitions, as only a small percentage of writers ever succeed. At the same time, there are examples when our writers received recognition abroad, in particular, in Russia, of course, because there are probably no self-sufficient writers in Kazakhstan yet. Personally, I cannot name any of them.
The market is too small, apparently.
Yes.
So you mentioned Daniyar.
Yes, Daniyar Sugralinov and his book, The Bricks. I don't know how commercially successful this project was, but the author gained certain fame.
Ajijiru Kumano is such an interesting person. You were talking about the writers who write in Russian.
Yes.
And what about Kazakh writing writers?
Smagul Ilubai might be considered a classic, and Dulat Isabekov is a classic too. Recently, we made a program about Awish Khan Kodar.
Oh, I'm familiar with Awish Khan Kodar.
So Awish Khan Kodar, he was a unique writer, he was bilingual. In the history of literature, bilinguals are a rare phenomenon. A rare phenomenon. He wrote in both Russian and Kazakh, and he was a writer of modern prose. He wrote this gorgeous novel, The Threshold of No Return. It is a very contemporary work. It has this taste of postmodernism to it, so different to any classical writings.
Was he a philosopher?
He was, and he was very good at it.
This year we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of our independence and reflect on what things have happened over this period. So what does the writers' community, the community of the people of culture, look like today? What did we achieve? What are we deprived of? So, in your opinion, today, what does an actual artistic process look like, and within it, the literary process?
You know, of course, there are good and bad things, there are different aspects. But in general, independence in itself is very valuable for me personally, and I think for any citizen of our country. The fact that we have been an independent state for 30 years so far is just incredible. The joy of this cannot be explained or expressed in any words. It doesn't matter how it happened, because there were both difficult periods and easy periods. But at the same time, it is obvious that we have a lot of talented youth. Yes, we do not always manage to create perfect conditions for them to live and create here. But on the other hand, the world has become global, and it is only natural that young people want to try their luck in, say, San Francisco, or in Shanghai, or somewhere else. They want to know the world unlike us, who were not able to travel. But today, young people have no boundaries, whether physically or mentally. And we have Dimash. We are proud of his achievements, and the whole world admires him.
Iman Bek?
Iman Bek. Honestly, I'm so happy for him.
I can't understand this. How did he get that? The Grammy?
It is a new music art, DJing. Iman Bek got his first Grammy. It is a historical achievement for Kazakhstan. I'm so happy. It is a great sign.
It is a sign.
Yes, it is a sign of our 30th independent anniversary. We're doing great when it comes to creativity as well as in many other things. Kazakhstan has never offended anyone.
Never attacked anyone.
Yes, Kazakhstan has always been trying to bring kindness to the world.
And let's finish right here. At this very positive thought, this conversation has no end. Thank you so much, Beknur.
My pleasure.
You are such a great person to talk to.
Thank you.